Hello, I am Adam,
And I'm Adrian.
and welcome to Cast from the Crypt. Today, I feel like this episode's a little more impromptu than normal, because Adrian, what did you just watch and want to talk about?
Malignant.
Malignant.
The 2021 James Wan flick.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a relatively new film.
Came out 9 months ago, to give
Yeah,
you some perspective.
I probably watched it like a month or two after it came out, so it's been not nearly as recent, but pretty recent, and every important thing in this movie that happens is pretty memorable. So, what
Yeah.
did you think about this movie first and foremost?
Okay. Before I talk about my personal opinions on the movie, I need to say this. James Wan is a prolific horror director of the 2000s, 2010s. He has, and director in general. He made a ton of money, over $1 billion on Aquaman, made a ton of money on Furious 7, has made a lot of money even with the Conjuring franchise. But people love this guy's work. I don't know if critics love it, but certainly audiences. The Conjuring franchise, regardless of how you or I feel about it, is really, really popular. Same with Saw, which wouldn't exist without James Wan. So I respect James Wan, though personally I'm not the biggest fan of many of his franchises. Now, this movie, I was expecting from the promotional material, from the trailer, I was expecting this to be just like The Conjuring, right? There is a lady who is tortured by visions, and there is a ghost monster thing in her home. That is not what this movie is. And I personally was really unimpressed for like the first 45 minutes to an hour of this movie. And then all of a sudden, my perspective changed as the movie radically changed. I can go further into detail as we talk about the movie a little bit more, but what do you think about this movie?
Okay, I like that. You're gonna be surprised to hear this. I hated this movie.
No, I'm not surprised.
I hated it, even with the tonal shift. I'll call it. It was a pretty big shift. Even with that, I was like, I hate this movie. Like when that
Now,
happened, they lost me.
this is what I think is at the root of our disagreement here. Do you think this movie is purposefully campy?
No,
Okay, I do.
you do.
I do. I do. I've read interviews. I've done my research. That is why I'm willing to give this movie some cred.
But if it's not if it is purposefully campy and it doesn't come across as purposefully campy,
To me, it did. To me, it did.
I don't know. I just felt like a bad movie to me.
Hear me out. Hear me out. You've seen most of what this man's done, right?
I
James
guess
Wan?
not.
Well, okay. You've seen Conjuring, yeah?
I have.
You've seen Saw.
I have.
You've seen Dead Silence,
I have seen Dead Silence.
Insidious.
I have seen Insidious.
Okay. This movie, the tone is nothing like those movies. I think it's a 100% just like hard left turn. And what kind of furthers that notion for me is that I have watched a few interviews with James Wan talking about this movie, in which he says that this is like an homage to those like old school B movie Italian bad horror movies, the kind of thing that you find covered in dust on the Blockbuster shelf.
Okay, I think
I
he's
don't know,
full
man.
of it. What?
You think so? You think it came out and then he was like covering
Yeah,
his ass?
no, I absolutely think it was that. I don't trust the director at all. I think what happened is he started making a movie, and this is probably why the tonal shift is so bold. He started making a movie, uh, somewhere along the way realized this movie was terrible, and then was like, "Screw it, let's make it crazy." That's what it feels like happened to me.
Really?
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes sense, though, doesn't it?
It
'Cause
does. I like that theory.
it's really serious at the beginning. It's
It
super
is.
serious at the beginning.
It
Um,
is. So I guess let's give some context. This is a 3-act film. This is your classic 3-act film. It has 3 parts of the movie that are defined by completely different tones. The first act, we meet our main character just after this opening sequence that's very cryptic. In the opening sequence, we see a hospital. It's definitely taking place back in time. There is a doctor. Her name is Florence Weaver. We're not entirely sure what she does, but we hear the screams of children and we see blood splatter. And there is a violent occurrence taking place in one of the rooms. And through some, I guess I can't even call it subtle, but they don't show us the creature in this scene. But off the top, they show us that there is some sort of powerful creature that has control of like lights and radio waves because it can broadcast its thoughts through a radio that's in the room. It's not a great scene. It's very, very hokey. But for me, it felt campy. This is where we first meet the character Gabriel, but we don't know anything about him outside of that. And we don't even see him in that first scene. We see his outline through a hospital curtain.
yeah, and he's of some alien shape or form.
Yeah. Yeah, he's clearly deformed.
Yeah, it's very blurry, and he's screeching like also some alien beast.
Right.
Questionably human, of course. So you really don't think he's human. This scene feels cheaper than the rest of the movie and campier. So like, yeah, okay, this feels really campy. It's almost laughable. Like some orderlies go in and get killed. There's people in this hospital getting killed like left, right, and center. And then it ends with Dr. Florence Weaver. She says, "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago. I'm removing the tumor." And then she runs in with a scalpel. And that's all we see. That's all we know,
Right.
which
Right.
cryptic. Now, I could believe this scene in when they were cutting this movie was filmed after the rest of the movie.
It probably was.
I believe
It
that.
probably was.
Because then we go to 27 years later, our first introduction to the main character, Madison. She's pregnant. Right off the bat, she like walks into her home. She's
Waddles in.
because she's like fit to burst pregnant. And then her husband shows up and starts abusing her.
Well, it's the worst possible. Again, massive tonal shift, but it segues you into the first act pretty well. Because the first act is this woman dealing with trauma from her abusive husband and his loss. They do it pretty quickly, but yeah, like you said, she walks in from her job. She's wearing scrubs, so she's probably a nurse. And her occupation never really comes up after that. But her husband, you immediately know he's a D-bag because he's wearing shoes on the bed. And he's watching TV in the room, despite the fact that they have a living room with a TV. I don't know why he's in there. But they start to argue because Madison doesn't feel well. And he says, you should really take more time off of work. You know, for a second, you're thinking, okay, he's trying to take care of his wife. And then he says, I'm tired of watching my children die inside of you. And I guess they're suggesting that she has had miscarriages in the past. And he gets upset with her and like throws her head into a wall.
Yeah, he like smashes her head, and then like there's blood on the wall, so she's like bleeding pretty severely out of the back of her head. She locks herself in her bedroom to keep her rabid husband off of her, and she passes out because she's like once again like pretty severely concussed and bleeding out of the back of her head.
Right, and this is where the the Conjuring-esque storytelling starts to happen. Something that I find really interesting is the evolution of the creature in this movie. And for me, it was actually a pretty effective breadcrumb trail because there is a large reveal in this movie. And when I say large, I mean monumental reveal in this movie, which we will get to. But in the first act, we really don't know what this presence is. But the first time that we see it, it's actually going after Derek, her abusive husband. And this thing makes quick work of Derek. In her sleep, she is seeing visions, right? Of like this almost smoke monster running through the house.
Yeah, it's like an evil shadow.
Right. Derek, however, is seeing something slightly different. He is seeing almost what I would describe as like a feminine shape, what looks like a physical body. And there's this, classic James Wan sequence where he goes into the bedroom. There's static on the TV, despite the fact that it's a plasma screen or, an LCD TV, not a CRT, and that doesn't happen anymore, but whatever. And he sees a outline of a woman sitting facing the TV, but then the TV goes dark, and when the lights come back up, the shape is gone. Your classic reach at a scare there.
Yeah, so we've gone from goofy monster in a hospital to abused pregnant woman who's had a number of miscarriages. So I feel like the shift here,
yeah,
you understand what I mean?
Oh, I do. And the shift only gets, more intense because Derek is brutally killed just after seeing the shape in the living room. They don't show exactly how it happens, right? But they do show his like final state just after he's killed by this monster. He is like just his neck is twisted all the way back and his arms are like inverted. Pretty good body horror in my opinion.
Yeah. Isn't she attacked right after this?
She is. So she discovers his body. And you can only imagine, right? This woman was just abused. Now all of a sudden finding her husband dead. I thought maybe that there would be some legal implications, right? That maybe cops would come and immediately accuse her of something. I thought that's where this movie was headed. But no, pretty immediately, the killer, the monster, starts to follow her. But again, it's a shadow monster when it's chasing her. And it attacks her. She falls and is unconscious and then wakes up in a hospital.
Yeah. And her sister's there, and her sister says that her baby did not survive.
Right, so yet another miscarriage.
So miscarriage and dead husband and
Right.
abused. Like, this doesn't feel campy at all, does it?
No.
Yeah. I have a
Big
hard
shit.
time. Yeah.
Well, hold on, but it doesn't mean that it won't eventually become campy, because it does.
But this is what I mean by, like, it surely
You think it was
a
gonna
movie
happen.
that starts this way did not intend to end with full camp.
Maybe.
So like
Maybe.
it's a really serious beginning, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you might be right.
Barring that one scene, but once again, like I said, it could have been added after the fact. That one scene at the beginning in the hospital with that crazy monster, that feels like the end of the movie, where it's campy. But there's a very big stretch between then and the end of the movie where it's like really serious. The characters are being serious. It's very dramatic. There's not a hint of tension breaking comedy or anything. It's tense, it's serious until a very dramatic shift.
But let me remind you, this is just the first act of this movie. This act ends pretty much here. We meet the two characters that, in my view, or three characters really, in my view, that usher in that second, more detective movie act that we get. We meet Kakoa, who is this hunky cop and his partner, I think her name was Officer Moss or Detective Moss, and they are obviously in the hospital because they found a brutalized man in a house, and she was the only other person there. This is not a strong part of the movie because, one, these cops are just not very interesting, and two, the fact that they don't detain her way earlier on in the movie, they do eventually detain her, and it's like way too late. Like, she should have at least been in for questioning. But nonetheless, the two cop characters and the sister, their inclusion is when the movie starts to change.
Yeah.
This opening act that is like very melodramatic doesn't last very long. So that's why I maintain that I do think the camp was intentional and planned from the beginning. Premeditated camp, if you will.
Yeah, these cop characters are like cartoons. Like,
they're awful.
Really, really exaggerated.
Yeah.
It does shift. It does maybe Act 2 becomes, it gets campy, but I don't think it's integrated well. I don't think it works that, out pretty much at all. I don't know. This movie, man. Because normally, like, if it's a terrible movie, like just the worst movie ever, I can enjoy it still. I'm still like, that movie was great, Not this movie, though. Like, I can't give it to this movie. I would not watch this movie again.
Fair enough.
I would like to point out that it had a budget of $40 million, and it only made $34 million. So this movie lost money.
That's a more difficult figure because remember that this movie barely had a theatrical
That's
showing
true. It was 2021. Theaters
it
weren't quite back.
It went straight to HBO Max initially.
Yeah. It was pretty big on HBO, but I don't know. Like, are we calling this a success? Is this a success?
No. I'm not saying that. It's probably James Wan's biggest flop so far. Now, this next part is probably the lengthiest part of the movie. Kakoa Shaw, I believe is his last name, and his partner Regina Moss. They are on the case, and they're not very good at their job. And I don't see any sense in talking about the mystery portion of this movie. Essentially, the figure, the being that has wreaked havoc thus far, is now moving on, and the killer has now moved on and wears a black trench coat and has murdered 2 doctors. In fact, the very same doctor that we meet in the opening sequence, just brutally. Now, the tying element here is that Madison can see all of it. So every time there's a murder, though she is not in danger, she is getting very vivid visions of the murders. So she sees Dr. Florence Weaver killed, and shortly after, she sees some like chud partner that she had. You see him for like 5 minutes in the opening act. In fact, even shorter, maybe 5 seconds in the opening sequence. And he's killed too. His death is super gory and just fantastic, in my opinion.
I will give you that.
Yeah, I mean, you like that one, right?
Yeah, I do. Well, the woman
it's
too.
The weapon.
He beats this woman to death with a trophy that she get. It's the doctor from the beginning, so she's accomplished surgeon. Beats her to death with a trophy, and it's a trophy of an Asclepian rod, but it's notably dagger shaped, like right off the bat. And then later in the movie, we see this figure in
blacksmithing.
Blacksmithing in an attic somewhere, like with a grindstone, sharpening this trophy into a knife, and has this goofy freaking knife for the rest of the movie. And this is awesome. His murder weapon.
It's awesome. And we see it used on the random dude that gets killed. He just gets stabbed like 1,000 times.
Oh yeah, like gutted
in his bed. And Madison, this particular vision presents itself Like she watches him as though she's laying in bed, right? So for some reason, she is seeing it all happen very, very vividly. But the killer doesn't seem to notice that she's there when it's happening, right? It's almost as though she's in the room, but he can't quite see her either.
And somewhere along all of this, I'm not quite sure about the chronology, we see like a woman giving a tour of like
it's just before these two murders.
Okay, well there you go. This woman is giving a tour of like an underground.
It's the Seattle Underground.
Yeah, the Seattle Underground. She's giving a tour of the Seattle Underground, and it's creepy. And then she ends up being alone in the underground, and then he kidnaps her.
Yeah, so he brutally murders two people, but then kidnaps one woman.
One random woman who
Yeah.
I was like, okay, we don't know why any of this happens. So
yeah,
far,
and I think you're supposed to wonder because they do explain it later. But for me, it was incredibly jarring. I was like, okay.
Yeah, they didn't do a good job of like, keep this in mind, put a pin in that. Right. Like that's not good storytelling. You don't want to keep a pin in anything that is irrelevant until a certain point.
And speaking of bad storytelling, then we have this whole, like, I'd say 30-minute sequence in which Madison has to get like a hypnotherapist to unlock memories that she had blocked out. She says very early on in the movie that she can't remember anything before the age of 8.
Yeah, which you're only just now realizing that. I'd be a little like, dang, what happened for 8 years?
So she's blocking out core memories, and that's when Madison is able to recall, at the very least, that her birth name is Emily, and she starts to remember this Gabriel name.
Yeah,
Gabriel.
So
keeps coming up.
She's adopted. Also, we find out pretty early on.
We do learn that as well. That she's adopted, and her sister is not her blood relative, which they make a really big point of. Like, I don't feel like adopted people. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but I don't feel like they constantly remind you you're not their real sibling.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But in this movie, Madison, though they seem to have a pretty good relationship, she keeps telling her sister, like, "Oh, we're not blood, but," or at the very end, there's like this weird emotional moment that just doesn't work because Madison's like, "I love you anyway."
Damn, yeah, I know.
And it's like, okay, thank you.
Mind you, her name's Sydney, but her sister is her younger sister. And she has been in her life, her entire life. Like, when that child was born, she was already in the family.
Right. It's not like she was adopted and she all of a sudden has, like, a 30-year-old brother.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, you're right.
Really cruel.
But anyway, we get one of my favorite parts of the movie. And I can't... If you haven't seen this movie, the truth is that Madison should have been, like I said, detained way earlier on. I mean, there was a murder in her home. She is seeing murders before they happen and then talking to detectives about it, or excuse me, as they happen. There's no reason why she would not be at least in custody getting questioned. But we would have no movie if she was taken into custody. What does it finally is the police are inside of Madison's house, and all of a sudden we get a simultaneous sequence or scene where the woman that's been kidnapped is able to free herself from her restraints. She was kind of tied up against the wall. It was a how would you describe her tie-up situation?
Well, it's back in this figure's lair, the same place he made the dagger, and it's like clearly in some sort of rafters or some attic, so the roof is slanted, and she's like hanging from the wall, the roof, the slant, like tied up to it and just hanging from it.
And she is able to get free, but as she gets free, in like the most comedic way possible, she falls through the floorboards of the attic just after freeing herself. And these homes are like not massive. Like the house that Madison lives in, they keep showing it from the outside. And it's not big.
It's a suburban house, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think she would die from this fall. But the lady falls through the floorboards, falls straight on her face in this home. And sure enough, It is Madison's own home. She's been in the attic the entire time. And we, the viewer, are supposed to believe that Gabriel has been using Madison's home the entire time. He has been living in there the entire time.
Yeah.
This is finally where the detectives are like, all right, I guess we should take her in.
Yeah, when a missing woman falls from the literal ceiling. And this is supposed to be, the way this is shot is like they're in the house asking Madison questions, and they cut back to this woman escaping. And then they marry that by, she literally falls from one scene into the other.
Yeah.
And
when you describe it that way, I really like it.
yeah. I guess I do like that kind of. It's very campy, but at this point in the movie, it's not.
What you said? It's what?
Campy?
Oh.
Dude, shut up.
It's
I said it was campy. This scene's campy. Yes, but it's not at a point in the movie where the movie's really that campy or campy enough. Well, I feel like. And so when this happened, when I first watched it, I was like, what? I was like, this is so stupid. At this point in the movie,
I think it goes to the third act.
Yeah, well, there's at some point in the movie before this, Detective Kakoa Shaw like chases Gabriel.
Oh God! Yeah.
Oh man, and it's like the dumbest chase scene. Like he chases him through this. It's equivalent to when Danny Glover chased the Predator.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like that crazy. Like he's a super cop. This man is like there's a fire escape, and Gabriel's literally like jumping. Instead of taking the stairs, he's jumping from ledge to ledge, so that way
they're doing parkour.
Yeah, they're doing like crazy parkour, and like he's just a super cop, I guess.
It's very Bond.
Yeah.
Very, very Bond all of a sudden. And then, after the reveal that Gabriel has been in the house the entire scene, and Madison is in the cop car, there's this big dramatic scene. It's raining, and the detectives are going inside. They've now made the house a crime scene, which it should have been way earlier. Again, why is all of this just now happening? It should have been a crime scene way, way earlier. A person already died here. And, didn't just die, was clearly murdered. But whatever. Madison's put into the cop car, and her sister is, of course, freaking out. And she's saying, she's innocent. How could you take her in? Though, this is pretty damning stuff.
Oh, yeah. At this point, too, it is notable that the detectives have discovered that all these murdered people are all connected to Madison's past. The doctors all worked on her before she was adopted. And
they have a file on her showing that she had received treatment at the same hospital that Dr. Weaver worked at.
Yeah, and I think this is when they also, if I may say, discover that the woman kidnapped in the attic was actually her birth mother. So, everyone is connected to her. Every victim. There's a woman in her house and a murderer in her living room. Why? She should be in jail. Damning stuff. Really damning stuff. But this is the best part of the movie, isn't it?
Yeah. The movie takes truly a awesome in the biblical sense turn, where if you are not watching this movie and you are just not mouth agape during the rest of the 45 to 50 minutes that remain in this movie, because this is a long one. This movie's over 2 hours, right?
111 minutes, so almost exactly 2 hours.
There you go. It feels longer.
It really does. Happens. Yeah, that's another problem I have with this movie, is it feels so long. It takes forever for it to get good. Not good, but, dumb.
They have this, now that Madison is detained, they use Sydney a lot more, the sister. And she goes all the way by herself to this really hilarious Castlevania-looking hospital that sits at the top of a mountain. It looks like Frankenstein's castle from the Universal Monster movies. And she drives up, and her tire is, hanging off of a cliff. It's just the most absurd sequence. But as she makes her way in, this place is now abandoned. She finds a file on Emily, which of course, remember, is Madison's original name, basically stating that she has a parasitic twin that shared both the same brain and same spinal cord as her when she was growing up. And Sydney, I believe from the hospital, obtains these tapes, and she takes them to her real mother, the mother that raised Madison, and they watch them together. And we finally see it. We finally see Gabriel when he was attached to Emily. Again, I should just probably refer to her as Madison because that's what we know her as. But we see Madison as a little girl, and she's talking to the person that's interviewing her. She's talking about Gabriel. And then we get this fantastic shot where the person with the camcorder goes behind. Mind you, there's a fantastic CRT filter, so the video's fuzzy and grainy. And you just see Belial, like something out of Basket Case. Just, it's like this, how would you describe it? It's got like little raptor arms, and it's this massive, nasty growth. And it's just like roaring, like, making crazy noises. And they cut back to the two people watching it, which are Sydney and Madison's mom. And they are just like, freaking out. They can't believe that this thing was once attached to Emily.
Yeah.
And we also find out shortly after this that when they removed Gabriel from Madison, they kind of did a poor job because they kept part of him inside of her brain. They literally show in the video them just like forcing his little face back into her skull and closing it as though that was fine.
Okay, so
sorry, go ahead.
Please let me get into this. Let me dissect this a little.
Please. Much like they did to
So they turn around, they show this creature for the first time, and it's like her entire back and the back of her head is like a Roswell alien, basically, that screeches, and it's so gross looking. And it when they did that, I was like, oh my god. it's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. But they remove it. They cut it out. Now you understand why she said at the beginning of the movie, I'm going to cut out the tumor. The tumor is Gabriel, is this thing on her back. And they, like you said, they cut it up and push it back into her head. That would kill anything. Of course, being dissected. So I have assumed at this point in the movie, okay, cut off this tumor twin, and now he's haunting her. The ghost of the tumor twin, maybe. Because she's still getting visions. And the tumor twin still appears to be psychic. Still can talk through radios and phones, and like can destroy lights, and I think can even like kind of move stuff with his mind. So because of that, I assumed this is like a haunting situation. But no. And we pretty quickly discover what's really happening, because meanwhile, Madison has been taken to the county jail and is put in a holding cell with a slew of other rough and tough women.
This is the worst depiction of prisoners I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, it's like a massive cell. It's like a football field. And it's just in jail, mind you. This isn't even prison.
Yeah, it's a huge cell.
It's like
there's going to be some insane choreographed action in this scene already. But the cast of characters we meet, two are notable. There's one lady with a hilarious mullet. Nobody looks like this person anymore. Maybe in parts of Arkansas. Maybe. But certainly not here where Madison is. And she keeps calling Madison princess and bullying her for whatever reason. In a cell this big, I don't know why they would isolate Madison and pick on her. My favorite prisoner, though, is the Foxy Brown character.
Oh, yeah, there's like straight from a 70s blaxploitation film, some woman.
Yeah, I don't know why they dressed her like this.
No, she's like in a jumpsuit.
Garb. She's in a jumpsuit. She's got a big afro and like the platform shoes.
Yeah.
I don't know why they put her in this movie like that. But then these two team up They're friends. They're unlikely friends. They team up and they start to just destroy Madison. They like throw her on the ground. They're beating her up for no reason. And then it activates. I think they hit her head, right?
Yeah, they hit her head.
They hit her head, and we see she's bleeding from her skull. But then we get this gnarly shot of Gabriel, the skull splitting and his little face showing. And he like roars. He lets out his nasty roar. And it's a pretty funny shot where the prisoners react and they're like, what? And they all die in what is one of the most jarring scenes I have ever seen in a horror movie. Truly. I can say that confidently. My mouth hit the floor.
Me too. My jaw was agape. I was shocked at this part of the movie. She like stood up and started convulsing, and like they really dramatically showed her the back of her skull splitting open. And Gabriel's face, they showed it one other time, but it's like a CGI nightmare. It's like one eye in the corner of a mouth peering out of a scar is what it looks like. And every time you've seen Gabriel, he's had this like long, gross, like metal hair. And here we find out it's because all of these kills, it was really Madison backwards. She's unconscious, but Gabriel, who's living out the back of her head, is conscious and controlling her body and killing people with it. But once again, backwards. Like, she has to move backwards. Her joints, I don't know how they work backwards. But...
And I don't know how at the end of the movie she just walks away. Like, he didn't completely dislocate her entire body.
Yeah.
But if I may,
please.
This is why I think that this was 100% intentional from the very beginning. That I disagree with your notion that it was an afterthought. Because none of this would have happened if her abusive husband hadn't pushed her into the wall head first.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think they did know what they were doing. Now, whether it works for you or not is a different story. But they set it up from the very beginning. Head trauma that splits open the head makes it easier for Gabriel to get out. And what sets this whole thing in motion is head trauma. Her husband throws her head first into a wall. She's bleeding from the back of the head. And we know now how Gabriel comes out. This scene in the jail cell, it's just a massacre. He breaks people's bones and uses their broken bones to stab other people. And I think they tear off limbs, or maybe that's later on in the police station. But Gabriel just murders everyone in sight. And it's a pretty fun, very Matrix feeling sequence, in my opinion. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
I loved this because she's still wearing like that black trench coat. He wears the trench coat backwards, so like her mouth is kind of covered up by the collar. And this whole scene, it's watching this woman backwards break dance because like her face is still there, but she's just got her eyes closed and she's killing people backwards. It's so stupid. Once she does that too, like every person in the cell, like one-on-one runs at her. Like they're the crazy 88 in Kill Bill. I don't know why she kills all of them. All like 40 of them. And the final woman was like yelling for the guard, and the guard never came. And she killed that mullet woman. Wow. Like at this point, I was like, wow. What amazing. You were very excited by this movie, and you were texting me about it.
I was.
And I think you put it best when you said, there isn't anything like this. And that is true. Like maybe Basket Case, but this is different. Maybe the reason for that, though, is because nobody dared to make something this stupid before now. I don't know. I think, me saying that they took a campy turn midway through production, that's, speculation. That's hearsay. That's BS. There's nothing to prove that. I'm just saying it feels that way because of how disjointed this movie is. And like, how does this movie at this point? How did it start out the way it was, and then it was a detective movie, and now it is, like you said, like Matrix with this woman fighting backwards?
Speaking of disjointed, Madison, how does she get back to the police station?
I think she just escapes and then goes
Well,
to
the
the
bit is
police
dead.
station.
I don't remember. It's honestly a blur.
No, yeah. So
because that scene is so insane, but she does make her way to the police station.
no.
No?
So this is because this movie once again is like the way the police in this movie work is the way the police work in Lego City. She escapes her jail cell, and of course, the jail is the same building as the police precinct. So she escapes the jail, and then like in the other room are all the cops in the city working.
Yeah, that's right. And the police station is a similar vibe. You already know what's going to happen because this is a massive police station.
Yeah, once again, a room 10 times the size it would ever be in real life.
So now we get a similar sequence in which everybody dies, except here it uses guns, which is just fantastic.
Yeah.
It disarms people, it rips people's arms off, it uses arms as spears, it shoots people in the face. Gabriel does it all. And you thought the first scene really kind of took you out of it and changed the tone on you. Well, now you get it. After the second massacre that they do, you understand where they're going from here. One of my favorite moments happened shortly after this because Sydney, of course, has been on the case for some time, and she's trying to figure out what it is, why Gabriel is doing this, how Gabriel even works. And Sydney, I don't remember if it's like just after the massacre scene when she's trying to basically get Madison to wake up and take control of her body again. But Sydney, I don't know how she figured it out because it's not in the file, but she says, Madison, this is why you've miscarried so much. Gabriel has fed off of your fetuses. Wake up. He's evil.
Yeah,
like,
the fetus
I think
thing.
We knew he was evil. And where is this pseudoscience coming from?
She ate them fetuses. Like, she just knows that because plot and shock value.
And like at that point, I had already forgotten about the miscarriages.
Yeah, exactly. Put a pin in it, come back to it. At this point in the movie, I have seen a woman kill people backwards. Like, I have forgotten about everything from the beginning of the movie. Like, you try to bring it back, and like, that was 4 years ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What a journey we've been on at this point. I think Shaw shows up and wants to like and finds like literally every cop dead, and then he goes to shoot her, but he's like, no, we can't kill her, it'll kill Madison. And it's like, okay, Madison has killed 40 people at the, like, maybe you gotta sacrifice one.
Yeah, sorry, buddy, I think you're gonna have to do it. But you know, he's too busy. The whole movie he's been trying to bone Sydney.
Yeah.
Like the whole movie in the most inopportune times. Like Madison's husband died, and he sees Sydney walk in, and he's like, hey, you're kind of interesting. It's like, hey, man, do your job, you horn dog. Why are you just hanging around Sydney the whole time?
Yeah, bad.
So, I don't know. I think that's what did it. And that's where Sydney yells that at Madison, where she's like, he's eating the fetuses. Because they're both in the police station trying to get Madison to wake up.
Yeah. Well, Gabriel escapes and goes to a hospital to find that woman who is his birth mother, their birth mother. And I guess he's gonna kill her and get revenge for her giving consent to remove him and kill him, basically.
Yeah, and she's like she's in really bad shape for what should have been maybe a broken rib or two. Like, that fall was not that bad.
Have you ever fallen through an attic?
Dude, there's no way.
I haven't, but I've seen people
like
do it.
Tops.
My dad fell through the attic and landed in the garage. And the garage has, concrete floor. It's pretty hard.
And was he nearly comatose?
He was like not even a scratch. He was fine. He just got back up.
That's my point. Maybe
my ceiling's a little lower, but still.
And your dad is like a hunk.
I'm glad you think so. I mean,
does that stay in?
I'm gonna cut it. Yeah, so Gabriel gets to the hospital and his mother wakes up from her coma and is like, "I'm sorry, Gabriel. You're my son and I shouldn't have done that to you." And then I guess
Wait, to
no,
which he
this is the
replied,
scene. So you were right. This is the scene where Sydney tells Madison Gabriel's been eating her fetuses. And that angers Madison so much that she takes control of her body and fights it. She fights it, as they do in every movie ever. And then they're in like this imaginary black void where her and Gabriel are like separate people. And she imagines a prison cell that she locks Gabriel behind. And she's like, "I'm in control. You'll never have power over me again." And he's like screaming and he says, "I'll escape one day." And then she wakes up and like, that's it. Like she just had the mental fortitude to banish Gabriel.
and
Like
this
that's
totally won't happen again.
it
And
won't
we're
happen
totally
again.
not going to get Malignant 2 Electric Boogaloo.
I don't think we will. I think maybe they wanted to, but we certainly are not getting a sequel to this movie.
God, do I hope we do.
I really doubt it. I
Make me a promise
seriously
that
doubt
if
it.
we do, we'll cover it.
This movie flopped. Absolutely, we will. But it's
Thank you.
what an anticlimax.
I love that scene. I thought it was
Oh my
hilarious.
god.
We should note that Gabriel, he talks like this.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
He
so
looks
like
stupid too.
he looks stupid. He talks like this. And that whole scene where he's like rattling against, she in her mind she creates a jail cell for him,
Yeah.
and she closes the doors on him, and he goes up and he's like, "Rah, rah," and it's just fantastic. She walks away and then she wakes up, and this is where we also get the emotional moment. We forgot to mention that there's this whole thing where maybe it's for the sequel that they're trying to set it up, but Gabriel is freakishly agile, freakishly strong. And earlier in the hospital, he flips an entire hospital bed on top of Sydney. Her legs should be shattered. Her knees, her menisci should be torn. But Madison goes to lift the bed off of her just after she conquers Gabriel. And Sydney's like, "No, you can't. It's too heavy." And Madison says, "It was my body when Gabriel was using it too." And so she becomes Superwoman and lifts the massive bed off of her sister. So I guess she just has super strength.
Yeah. Many things not explained, not even touched on by the
And
end
then
of
we
this
get
movie.
that great moment where Madison is like, "I still love you even though we have no blood relation, and
Yeah.
we're not actually related, and you're not my real sister. I still love you."
Yeah. When they defeat Gabriel 2, it does end with this like, "No," and you can see the back of her skull. He gets sucked into her, I assume, brain, sucked back into the skull, and then you watch the skull like close itself. So they don't explain why she has superpowers, but she does, and Gabriel does. And then I was like, okay, well the visions weren't really visions. She was actually there, and this is how she remembers it. And it isn't really supernatural. He's actually this, tumor. Really dumb, I know, but it wasn't supernatural. So why does he have psychic powers? Like, he still does have psychic powers. I thought that was like her imagining it, but no, he really does have psychic powers.
He can like control lights and radio waves, and they don't ever explain that.
Why? Yeah, and he never uses it. Like at the beginning of the movie, I think he's like throwing, like in that scene at the opening of the movie, where he's killing people in the hospital and they're trying to remove him from Madison. He like stuff's being thrown around, and I assumed like psychically, but he never does that again. He never uses his psychic powers after that, like except maybe on like 2 or 3 instances to speak through a radio. But he also notably has a mouth and can talk. So
yeah, he could have talked that whole time.
Yeah, I don't know.
He didn't have to communicate through the radio. You know, I stopped asking questions after the Matrix scene and found myself really enjoying this movie.
I checked out at the Matrix scene. See, that's the
I
difference
know.
between you and me. I was like, okay,
I know.
I'm done.
I don't know what it is. Usually, this sort of movie would not impress me. You know, I have a lot of issues with James Wan in general. I don't know what it is about this one where I was like, all right, James, I'm with you.
I like
Because
Saw.
people love and swear by the Conjuring movies, and I just find them to be the most boring things.
Yeah, I hate the Conjuring movies.
I do too. But they're incredibly successful. They're incredibly successful. For some reason, this just appeals more to me, and hence my very high review of it on Letterboxd. I read a great review of the movie, and it was like 5 stars, and the comment was, "This happened to my sister once," and it made me laugh.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I like Saw. That's all I'll give him. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, Saw's cool.
Saw's cool. Yeah, that's it. Saw's cool. I think I just don't like James Wan. I don't think I like any of his movies.
No, that's fair.
I feel like they're all just so poorly done, so shabbily thrown together. Sorry.
Oh, I find them to be well made and well shot. I just don't find them to be well written or interesting.
That's like the most important thing, though.
Oh, I agree. I understand. What I'm saying is I understand their commercial appeal. For me, this is just so antithetical to all of those movies that I think it made me happier.
Yeah. And then to like the reveal that he's a tumor on the back of her head. And then
Malignant.
I thought Malignant, and I was like, oh, I hate that.
Uh,
Malignant. Oh, okay. That's why it's called Malignant. I think that's the part that pissed me off the most. That like
That's awesome.
I was like, oh, that's the dumbest name. That's the dumbest. And that's when I checked out. That's when I was like, I'm done. I hate this movie.
I will say this. The writing in this movie is really bad. The acting and the music, the soundtrack, are so laughably bad. All the acting's terrible. Like, my heartfelt condolences to Annabelle Wallis. People seem to like her. She's in a lot of things. I find her so unimpressive, especially in this movie.
Oh,
She's
I
also
agree.
in the new Mummy movie, which I don't even need to go into. But God, she's awful. The cops are awful. There's this one, I don't know if you noticed. Do you remember the character with the glasses? She's like the forensic scientist. And she's in a few scenes, and she's like clearly obsessed with Krakoa.
I honestly don't remember, but
Yeah, she's pretty forgettable. She is in the movie for like, I'd say altogether like 15, 20 minutes. And I asked myself several times, who is this? Why is she here? The character, and by the end of the movie, I was really confused. I was like, why is this character in this movie? Why was she ever there? She served no purpose. Turns out she is James Wan's wife, and he just wanted to put her in the movie.
I'm not surprised. I like that he put her in a movie fawning over another man. So
I know. She also co-wrote this movie.
oh no. Do you think I don't know. Oof.
This was her idea, and he was just being a good hubby.
Yeah, I like to imagine that like she was serious. This is why it's the difference between camp and seriousness. She was serious about it, and he was like, "Well, I don't want to anger my wife, but
I don't want to rock the boat here.
yeah."
I love that. God, I hope so.
That's in my headcanon what happened. No, she's honestly probably the visionary because he, look at his track record.
Right?
Yeah, this movie, I know it was a worse movie, but I had more fun watching I, Frankenstein than this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. I
Wow.
hate this movie.
If I could go in a time machine and go back in time to the pre-production of I, Frankenstein, I would absolutely tackle, what's his name? Two-Face?
Aaron Eckhart.
Aaron Eckhart to the ground so that movie could not be made.
I like that. If you could go back
Just
in
as
time.
he's going to walk in to accept, I would tackle him, tell him, don't do it. It's the biggest mistake of your life.
I wouldn't. I'm glad he did that, and I'm.
Wow. This is the last episode of the podcast.
The schism has happened.
It's over.
I don't know. Well, I Frankenstein's like, oh, I had to have seen that at least once in my life. Like,
I didn't.
I ate it up. I was like,
I lost brain cells.
oh, I'm so glad. My brain cells for this movie turned into an aggressive alternate personality and killed people. So
Fair enough.
not only did I lose brain cells, I lost them to the power of evil.
Here's what I'll say. This is my final thoughts on this movie. I really enjoy this as a pretty substantial departure from James Wan's usual antics. And that's why I will recommend this to somebody. I think the twist alone is worth the price of admission, which is, if you have HBO Max, nothing. Therefore, I would highly recommend people watch this. It's a click away. I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad. I'm glad that you agreed to talk about it with me so last minute, because this just came out, really. I mean, it's only 9 months old, so I'm just happy that I was able to see it while it's still kind of relevant. I mean, I think it's James Wan's last movie, like the most recent he's made. So I'm here for it, man.
What if James Wan?
Those are my thoughts.
What if he dies tragically and this is literally his last movie?
Oh man,
he gets no redemption.
Sorry, James. He dies tragically because he's in a jail cell where there happens to be a brain monster.
Yeah, a backwards woman kills him. He's in that jail cell, of course, because he made this movie.
Full circle.
Yeah, I think this movie's like way too slow. Honestly, it's really boring for a really long time just to get to that one scene where she fights backwards. But whatever. I guess that's all I gotta say.
Me too. I love it.
Yeah, I knew you needed to talk about it. Like, I'm glad we could, just because you were like very excited about this, and I was like, okay, let's talk about it.
I was. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. And thank you everybody for listening. Goodbye.